Alright, it's time to test out the extent of my Sword Online knowledge, starting off with everyone's favorite arc, Aincrad. We begin our story by seeing a boy by the name of Kazuto Kitagaya, and like most of the people watching this video, he's a gamer, but with one key difference: he's really good at games. And before we know it, he puts on a VR headset known to this world as the Nerve Gear and enters Sword Art Online. Kazuto, now Kirito, that's his endgame name, was one of 1,000 people who got the chance to beta test this game, so you could say he knows what he's doing. This is evident by the fact that he immediately gets spotted by a fellow player who practically begs him to so-called show him his ways. Luckily enough for this strange player, he just so happened to have run into the anime protagonist, who also happens to be antisocial and have little to no friends. Yikes. Soon after, we learn this player goes by the name of Klein, and they decide to hang out. Kirito inevitably shows Klein the basics until it's pizza time, if you know you know, and Klein decides to log out. But unfortunately, that's not how this story goes. Soon it's revealed that the only way to log out, the logout button, is nowhere to be found, and they're teleported to the center of the starting town, the town of beginnings, where they come face to face with this game's creator, Akihiko Kayaba. He basically just says, if you die in the game, you die in real life, and pieces out, but not before he gives everyone their real life appearances and tells them that they have to beat all 100 floors of the castle Aincrad, get it, that's the name of the arc, if they want to escape his world. Kirito, being the experienced player that he is, grabs Klein and practically runs for the hills. He knows that any logical person would obviously freak out at this news and concludes that the best way to survive is to head to the next town before anyone else. Unfortunately for our boy, Klein has other friends, and Kirito knows that he wouldn't be able to single-handedly take responsibility for all of them, and if even just one of them dies, their death will be on him. Fortunately for Kirito, Klein has chat and tells him to go on without him, declaring that he can take care of himself. With a heavy heart and a bunch of regret to unpack later, he sprints out of town and by that the safe zone, declaring that this game won't beat him, and charges into episode 2. Where, unfortunately, a month has already passed and over 2,000 people have already died and they're still stuck on the first floor, oh my god. But fortunately for the remaining 8,000 players, some random dude named Diablo managed to find the entrance to the first floor's boss room, which you need to beat to progress to the next floor. He hosts a strategy meeting where a resident anime protagonist happens to attend, and everything's going great, until some random dude by the name of Kibao decides to hijack the meeting to rant about his political views, if you know you know, which just so happens to be about beta testers. He spouts some nonsense about how all the beta testers left everyone else to rot while they used their experience to get ahead of everyone else. Wait, fortunately for our boy Kirito, this absolute Chad Agil says mad cause bad, read a book, and they continue their meeting in peace. Until Diablo tells everyone to form groups amongst themselves, which wouldn't be a problem if Kirito happened to be socially competent. So he decides to group up with his future wife, Asuna, who also happened to be alone because, in her words, everyone else looked like they're already friends. Once the meeting's over, they decide to eat some bread in the shady alley before taking on the boss, Ilfang, the Kobold Lord. After a hard-fought battle of strategy and determination, the leader, Diablo, gets greedy and tries to get the last hit on the boss, which would drop a strong item fittingly called the last attack bonus. Unfortunately for him, the boss was slightly different from the beta test, and that difference cost him his life. Kirito tried in vain to save him, but all he got in response was the weight of everyone's lives thrust onto his shoulders and the admission that he too was a beta tester. With a newfound resolve, Kirito charges the boss with his new partner, Asuna, taking turns chipping away at the rest of the boss's HP. Eventually, the boss became too much for the duo and they're forced to take a back seat while some of the other more competent raid members take on the boss, but unfortunately for them, there are no protagonists. So with what little strength Kirito has, he charges the boss once again and with the help of Asuna, finishes off the remaining HP of the boss. Everyone starts congratulating the seemingly new hero until this little buzzkill Kibao ruins it, declaring that Kirito had to have been a beta tester and he himself let his former leader Diablo die. Remembering what Diablo told him, he decides to double, triple, and quadruple down and paints himself as the villain. To top it all off, some random combines the words cheater and beta tester together, forming a new name for the former hero, a beater. Kirito, ever the hero, takes the name in stride, clearing the air with Asuna and heading solo to the second floor. Unless you read the progressive novels. For episode 3, we get a 4-month time jump from the second episode where we pick up with Kirito spending some time with some randos on the 11th floor. Turns out Kirito saved these 5 players prior to this moment, read the light novels, and they treat him to a drink to celebrate, even though they're all underage. He later learns that this group of 5 are all members of their own guild, the Moonlit Black Cats, get it? And all are around level 20. Spending months alone with no social interaction leads Kirito to lie about his actual level, which is about 40 at the time, claiming that he's actually only level 20 as well. With that information, the group extends an invite to this mysterious player, unaware that he's actually the notorious beater everyone hates. Tough break, man. Kirito, desperately lacking social interaction, accepts and joins their guild. For the next month, Kirito spends his days grinding with his new guild and his nights leveling up at the current front lines of Aincrad, floor 28. But on one particular night, he runs into his old friend Klein, currently running with his very own guild. Faced with his past regrets, Kirito gives a small greeting and walks away. Later that very night, he gets a message from his friend and guild leader, Keita, that Sachi, one of their guild members, ran away and is nowhere to be found. Kirito easily tracks her down and attempts to comfort her. Turns out, Sachi here has an almost crippling fear of death, so being the gentleman that he is, lets her sleep with him. It's platonic, guys, I swear. The very next day, their guild leader decides to go off and spend their saved money on a guild house, and while waiting, the rest of the moonlit black cats, Kirito included, come up with an idea to raid a dungeon on the 27th floor. Kirito obviously objects to this idea, but the rest decide to throw caution to the wind and go anyway. Obviously, Kirito accompanies them to make sure they don't, do something stupid like getting themselves all killed. They explore for a good while until they find a secret room that even Kirito himself is surprised to find. A split second too late, Kirito catches on to what's going on, and before he knows what's happening, they're all trapped in a secret room with a seemingly endless amount of monsters coming from every direction. Kirito, being much more skilled and at a much higher level than the rest, is doing fine, but is forced to watch as each and every one of his friends get relentlessly cut down by the approaching horde. The scene then cuts to 6 months later, on Christmas Eve to be precise, where we see Kirito talking to an info broker who doesn't matter unless you read the progressive novels, about an item that can revive dead players. The info broker seems to not know the location of the boss that drops the item, but lets him know some invaluable details. With that information in hand, he walks away thinking nothing more but of the fate that had become of his previous guild leader. Later, we find our hero running through the snow towards a particular fir tree when a flash of light appears. Kirito stops, sword ready, only to see the face of his oldest friend in this world, Klein. Klein, being the good guy that he is, offers a depressed Kirito a spot in his guild and assistance in defeating the boss everyone seems to be looking for. Before we can decline, another flash of light appears and a guild going by the name of the Holy Dragon Alliance appears. Klein, knowing what they're here for, decides to take his guild and hold them off while Kirito goes on ahead. Hesitant at first, Kirito decides to go on despite himself, eventually finding himself face to face with the boss, and with one battle cry, charges them alone. Later, after the boss is dealt with, it is revealed that the rumored revival item is indeed real, but only works 10 seconds after a player's death. With the hope of the item being the only thing keeping the boy going crushed, he gives the item to Klein with the parting words, "If someone ever dies in front of you one day, use it." Continuing to walk away from a now defeated Klein who's just begging for his friend to stay alive. Later that night, sitting alone in an inn room, Kirito receives a message crystal from the one and only Sachi, explaining how she forgives him and telling him to stay alive, ending the episode with the faint hums of Sachi's voice. Anyway, on that depressing note, we got some small child running into a forest 2 months later because her old party sucked and were simps, but the difference is they weren't only simping for her. Unfortunately, she'll live to regret that decision because after being in this random forest, she immediately gets jumped by some Pokemon. Trying to follow the status quo, she sends her own out, but it quickly gets OHKO'd in spectacular fashion. Unfortunately for her, again, she's playing with Nuzlocke rules, and with nothing left to do, she accepts her death. Only for some rando— oh, wait, no, that's Kirito. And as per usual, he wipes the floor with each and every one of those primates and tried his best to comfort the small crying little girl. He learns her name is Silica and tells her how she can revive her pet dragon. Unfortunately for her, the item she needs is only found in a field dungeon on the 47th floor and has a time limit of 3 days. But Kirito decides to bite the bullet and who am I kidding? Carry her through the whole process. Later, they go back to town to prepare, running into some old acquaintances before leaving the next day. Eventually, they make it to the item named the Numa flower, and once obtaining it, are stopped almost immediately by what this game likes to call a yellow guild. In Sword Online, everyone starts with a green cursor above their head. You attack someone, it turns yellow, kill someone, it turns red. So this is basically just a guild of yellow players, and they just rob people. But thankfully for our new friend Silica, our boy was prepared for this, actually was expecting this, and his main goal was literally to lure these specific people out. Apparently, this guild of players murked some rando dude's party, and Kirito took it upon himself to bring them in. He let the 8 of them have their fun before telling them that his numbers are bigger than theirs and eventually sending them to Aincrad's very own jail. Together, Silica and Kirito go back to town and revive Silica's pet Pina. Next up at 5, about a month later, Kirito beefs with Asuna about a difference in battle strategy. Apparently they have a duel to settle this argument, but unfortunately that's not shown in this anime. A month after, and they're back to arguing again because of our boy Kirito wanting to nap. Somehow Kirito convinces Asuna to try it, and surprisingly, she actually does. What? When Kirito eventually wakes up, she's sleeping right next to him. For the next 8.5 hours, he decides to watch over her so no one literally murks her in her sleep. That's literally the reason, and she's more embarrassed than mad when she wakes up. She treats him to a peaceful dinner until until they hear a blood-curdling scream outside. They go check it out, and it turns out to be some guy hanging from a building with a sword in his chest. Holy cow. They try to help, but to their utter shock and terror, he dies. Considering they're in a town, or rather a safe zone, this feat should be impossible. So they decide to play detective and assistant, their words not mine, to find out how this happened. They question the girl who screamed and found out she's a friend of the man, Kynes, who died. They bring her home and get the murder weapon appraised to see not only the name of the weapon, but who made it and any other clues. After, they head to the town of beginnings to see if he died by checking the Monument of Life, a list of players alive and dead in SAO, and even discuss the possibility of death in a safe zone with Asta's guild leader, Heathcliff. Later, they question the girl, I'm not trying to say her name, Yoko, and she reveals that her friend and her were in the same guild. They apparently had a falling out after their leader was apparently murdered by one of their own guild mates over a rare item. Inevitably, they grab another frontline player who was in their guild as well and ask questions. But before they can come up with a possible conclusion, the girl starts rambling about ghosts before she gets a knife stuck in her back and falls out the window, dead. After cliffhanger, we start episode 6 with Kirito in pursuit of a hooded assailant. Considering he's in a safe zone, he has no way of stopping him, and he gets away. Defeated, Kirito comes back to Austin and company. With no other leads to go on, Kirito and Austin have a little dinner, still going over their new case's developments. Fortunately for our boy, Austin is kind enough to make them both food, but unfortunately Kirito drops his, and that's somehow relevant to the plot? Okay, hear me out. This is gonna be a long shot. From the dropping animation of the sandwich being destroyed, our Lord and Savior Kirito deduces that it is impossible for a player to die in a safe zone, but someone's armor durability can. All they'd have to do is use a teleport crystal right when their item's durability reaches 0, meaning that both the so-called dead players are alive and well. There's actually a different reason that they figure all this out in the light novels, but that's not important right now. Though that's not the end of this tale, because on floor 19 we see the last surviving guildmate of the trio, Schmidt, is praying to his former guild leader, Griselda's grave. Then out of nowhere, 2 hooded players, or ghosts, or whatever you want to call them, appear in front of him and convince him to confess to having a hand in killing his guild leader. They are later revealed to be the 2 previous so-called dead players, I knew it, and are shown to have set this whole thing up just to get him to confess. Unfortunately, their plan goes, how should I put this, off the rails when 3 members of Laughing Coffin, a red or rather murder guild, appear to kill all 3 of them. Thankfully, Kirito isn't having any of that and appears right in the nick of time on a hunch, apparently. The 3 members of Laughing Coffin decide to back off as a result, and it's revealed that the actual murderer of their guild's leader was none other than her husband, who was trying to cover up what he did by helping Kynes and No Name Girl by supplying them the weapons that killed them. He also inevitably ended up hiring the Laughing Coffin members to cover it all up. Later, he explains his reasons. It's really stupid, and they inevitably leave our 2 protagonists alone. They see Griselda's ghost for some reason and decide to get another meal together, putting an end to the 6th episode. Episode 7 is rather simple. Kirito needs a new sword. Asuna recommends her friend Liz's smith shop to him. Later, he shows up and breaks her best sword, leading to them going on a quest to floor 55 to get a material to craft an actual good sword for him. Kirito fights a dragon, Liz drops the ball, they fall down a hole, almost die, same old same old. They try to teleport out, but the hole is an anti-crystal zone, so they stay the night. In the morning, Kirito acts on a hunch, and turns out they're in the dragon's den, so they find the material they're looking for. The dragon comes back, and they decide to hitch a ride, sending them into Sky, where Liz learns that she's in love with Kirito. Wait, what? Later, they get back to the shop where Liz forges his new sword, the Dark Repulsor. After she's finished, Kirito tests it out and is satisfied with her work. Unfortunately, after all that, Liz is about to confess, but thankfully Asuna walks, more like runs in, and Liz loses her nerve. Let's be honest, Liz never stood a chance in the first place. Liz leaves the shop and cries under a bridge until Kirito shows up, tells her Madka's bad, and probably goes to hang out with Asuna in episode 8. Speaking of episode 8, we open up to Kirito having a cool fight scene on floor 74 before we cut to him finding a mob by the name of a ragu rabbit, otherwise known as an S-class ingredient. Basically just means it's super hard to cook, but tastes really good. Because he knows he can't cook it, he shows up to Eigo's shop with the intention of selling it before he runs into Asuna, who's kinda crushing on him at this point. They make a deal to eat at her place because her cooking skill is maxed out, plus she's really good at cooking. On the way there, they talk about guild politics before finally arriving. They, and when I say they, I mostly mean Asuna, prepare and eat said item that was made into a stew. After they're done, Asuna borderline threatens Kirito to form a party with her, and they meet up the next morning. When they meet up, Kirito has a duel with Asuna's weird bodyguard who was, quote, lurking around her house in the morning. Kirito wins the duel with ease using an out-of-system skill he invented called arms blasting, read light novels, that he used to destroy his opponent, Kurideal's sword. I'm sure he won't be important later, effectively ending the duel. After, Kirito and Asuna, while traversing a dungeon on the 74th floor, come across the boss room. They decide to take a peek inside and come face to face with the 74th floor boss named the Gleam Eyes. At the beginning of episode 9, after taking a look inside the boss room, our heroes run off screaming, literally. Even as two of the strongest players in the game, they know that they can't take on the boss alone. After, they have little side conversations about food and other things and decide to have lunch together. After they finish, they see a small guild walking up in front of them, and turns out the guild is none other than Klein's guild. Woo! After a short reunion involving a punch to the stomach, Klein's entire guild starts fangirling, or rather fanboying, over Asuna. That's when another guild make their appearance, and it's the Holy Dragon Alliance. Again, wow, this is a parallel. This guild usually only patrols floor 1, but after civil unrest or something dumb, the guild decides to send some players to the front lines, which normally would be fine if the players present weren't half dead, exhausted, and about to take on the literal floor boss. What the heck? The group of protagonists later decide to check up on the guild to see if they didn't actually decide to do what they claimed they would, but since they're all idiots, they did. Watching them all get massacred and hearing their cries of fear causes to have some non-flashbacks. This is until the first of many members of the Holy Dragon Alliance, Korvots, dies right in front of them. Before anyone else could die, Asuna charges in to protect her fellow players, Kirito, and even Klein in tow. Kirito, still burdened by the mistakes of his past, decides to single-handedly hold off the Gleam Eyes while the others help the Holy Dragon Alliance escape. Knowing he has no other choice, he asks Asuna and Klein to buy him 10 seconds. With their distraction and a few changes to his menu, he unleashes his hidden exclusive skill, dual wielding. With no time to explain, he enters a one-on-one fight with the boss itself, single-handedly draining its HP until there's nothing left. When the Gleam Eye shatters into a million polygons, Kirito, with his health barely in the red, utters a single, "Is it over?" before succumbing to the darkness of unconsciousness. He later wakes up to see Asuna with tears in her eyes above him, along with the rest of the group eagerly awaiting an explanation. He'll go on to explain how he'd gotten the game's second unique skill, dual wielding, a skill not only exclusive but completely shatters the in-game balance. With no more questions, the others leave Kirito and Asuna to rest in the home of the once great boss of the 74th floor. Eventually, more like inevitably, news gets out about a player single-handedly defeating a floor boss, which catches the attention of Asuna's guild, the Knights of the Blood Oath, or Blood depending on which version you're watching, and the commander of said guild eventually challenges the Black Swordsman to a duel to decide Asuna's fate, oddly enough. Basically, Asuna just wanted some time off with Kirito, so a deal was struck. If Kirito could defeat Heathcliff, the commander of the Knights of the Blood Oath, then Asuna would be free to leave with him, but if Kirito were to fall, then he would have to join the Knights of the Blood Oath itself. The battle begins in episode 10, Kirito and Heathcliff trading blow after blow. Earlier I'd said that Kirito was the second person to gain a unique skill. As it turns out, Heathcliff was the first. He has a unique skill known as the Divine Blade. This skill increases his offense while maximizing his defensive capabilities. As the fight continues, Kirito chains his attacks, making himself a perfect opening to strike and win the duel, only for Heathcliff's shield to move at an impossibly fast pace, solidifying his own win and ending the duel. Later, Kirito gets his new attire and spends more time with Asuna, where he inevitably tells her why he doesn't like guilds and his tragic past with the moonlit black cats. A few hours later, he gets called for a skill assessment for some reason with two members of the new guild, one of them being Asuna's old weird bodyguard, Kirito. That reason is then brought to light when they say that it's a good opportunity for him to quote-unquote bury the hatchet. So they went into a dungeon with 0 of their crystals, which would normally be fine if the water wasn't poisoned. Turns out, Kirito is actually a member of Laughing Coffin, the murder guild, and Kirito has to sit there and watch as Kirito brutally murders his new fellow guildmate. With the deed done, Kirito turns to face his next victim. The torture is slow and painful, and when Kirito's health gets into the red, the last spark of health he has faded. Taking one last breath and a final apology to Asuna, he closes his eyes, accepting his fate. But in the nick of time, a flash of light appears, sending Kirito flying back, and there, with worry in her eyes, stands Asuna, healing crystal in hand. Once Kirito's health bar is back to full, she stands ready to take on this new threat. After dishing out several attacks, Asuna has Kirito on the ropes, ready to end his life. Unfortunately for her, Kirito ends up begging for his life like the absolute pathetic person he is, and that gave Asuna pause. But it also gave Kirito the perfect opening to strike. One more second and Asuna would have been dead. But just like she had been there for him, Kirito was there for her, blocking his strike, temporarily losing a hand in the process. Fueled with rage, Kirito uses the martial arts skill to end Kirito's life, and with that, the conflict. Asuna, devastated by the fact that she had made him take a life, attempts to separate their current partnership. When Kirito kisses her squad goals, I've been waiting 10 episodes for that. And I wish I could say that's where the episode ends, but let's just say they get busy for the rest of the episode, okay? Oh yeah, and they get married. Wait, what? After the events of episode 10, our two protagonists are looking for a break, so for episode 11, they use their near-death experience as an excuse to take time off, like any normal person. Like I said earlier, they got married, and they have a little honeymoon and a log log cabin on floor 22. Finding it was a whole other issue, but that's for light novel readers. They spend the following week just doing normal couple things, not that I would know, when one day they stumble upon an unconscious girl. It takes a while for her to wake up, but when she does, she has no memory, past or present. As a result, they decide to look after her, even taking her to the town of beginnings on floor 1 to see if anyone recognizes her. While they're there, they find a bunch of grown men mugging a woman and several small children, so they just let Asuna take care of them and go on their merry way. But before they can, the little girl, whose name is Yui by the way, finds a glitch in the Matrix, ending the episode. Once Yui wakes up in episode 12, they take her to this woman named Sasha's orphanage, and no, they didn't leave her there. A woman inevitably walks in by the name of Yulir, claiming to need help saving her boyfriend from a secret dungeon on the first floor. They begrudgingly agree to help and get into a few shenanigans along the way. Everything is relatively peaceful. I mean, it's a nice arc, right? Until they run into the literal personification of death itself. Kirito and Asuna fight valiantly, but let's be honest, they get absolutely curb stomped by the boss. I mean, just blocking it basically runs their entire health bar dry. According to Kirito, this boss is from at least floor 90, so yeah. Thankfully, it turns out their daughter, Yui, is literally immortal. Wait, daughter? And one taps the boss. After the boss is dealt with, Yui tells them that she's actually a mental health AI and is currently being deleted by the system for saving them. She says her goodbyes and then pulls an "I'm not feeling so good, Mr. Stark," but thankfully for them, Kirito's apparently some god-level hacker and uses a nearby system console to save Yui's data to his nerve gear, so once they get out, they can meet her again. But now that I think about it, I think the floor boss was put there so they could stop any players from reaching the system access console. Okay, I'm geeking out again. The episode ends with them saying goodbye to a bunch of orphans and looking off into the distance at a new tomorrow, or episode 13. Episode 13, aka everyone's least favorite episode of this arc. There's nothing much to say. Kirito tries to fish, he fails, some old guy shows up and tells him it's the game's fault, not his. Asuna and Kirito make out, wait, what? Fight a big fish, then get called back to the front lines by Heathcliff for the 75th floor boss raid. Apparently, a group of 20 members scouted the boss room and were completely wiped out, so they had to call in all hands on deck. Later, Kirito and Asuna have a heart-to-heart, promising each other to watch each other's backs and not to die before grouping up with the rest of the raid and entering the boss room. At first inspection, the boss room is empty, but then dropping from the ceiling, the 75th floor boss appears, the Skull Reaper. Moving in a blink of an eye, the Skull Reaper cuts down 2 raid members in one hit. The rest of the raid group tries desperately to fend off its attacks, but nothing seems to be working. Despite many of their efforts, the Skull Reaper continues to mercilessly kill player after player. Knowing they have to act fast, Kirito and Asuna form a plan and charge the Skull Reaper, unaware that this will be in fact their final battle. Episode 14 begins with a valiant effort. Sword skills and scythes clash as the opposing players try desperately to deplete the boss's HP, but finally their chance arrives and the seemingly invincible boss goes down, ending the fight in a flash of blue polygons. While recovering from the taxing fight, the group discovers that 14 members of the assault team lost their lives in the effort to defeat the 75th floor boss. Morale low, the group continues to mumble amongst themselves about the horrors they've yet to face. That is, all except one. The esteemed commander of the Knights of the Blood Oath stands amongst his men, his health bar said to have never reached the yellow. That's when it clicks. The skill, the duel, the health bar, all of it. Kirito stands, weak but not yet defeated, and charges Heathcliff with the flash of a sword skill. Heathcliff notices, but isn't quick enough to react. Kirito hits his mark. At least he should have, if not for the blank immortal object hanging where his sword landed. Kirito calls him out in front of everyone, claiming that this man in front of them is the creator of Sword Art Online himself, Akihiko Kaiba. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, he was right. Kai proceeds to paralyze everyone except for the so-called hero in his story, the man who will stand before the Demon King and challenges him to a duel. The terms? A fight to the death. No admin privileges. If Kirito wins, the game ends 25 floors early, right here, right now. But if he loses his life and the player's best chance of beating this game. It's obviously a trap, but Kirito doesn't care. He owes it to everyone still alive in this game to try. So he accepts and says a final goodbye to his friends and loved ones before the duel begins. It's a back and forth fight of pure skill, black and red clashing together. Kirito knows that Kaiba knows every sword skill, so he can't rely on those, but even the strongest players get restless. Kirito inevitably activates one of his sword skills, effectively sealing his fate along with everyone else's in all of Aincrad. Kirito closes his eyes, ready for death to come, but it never does. In front of Kaiba's sword stands the girl he swore his life to, Asuna. She takes the hit head on for him, sacrificing her life for his. With one final "I'm sorry" followed by a goodbye, Asuna takes her last breath and shatters into a million pieces. With his reason to fight gone, all this broken man can do is stand and pathetically swing Asuna's sword. With a look of disappointment, Kayaba stabs the fallen hero, solidifying his fate. Kirito knows he's dead. He knows he failed, but he refuses to let her sacrifice be in vain. So with one final plea, with a final scream, "Not yet," he thrusts Asuna's trusty rapier into Kayaba's chest, killing them both in the process. Next thing he knows, Kirito wakes up in a land in the sky, watching all of the castle Aincrad crumble beneath him. He succeeded, yet failed all the same. He had nothing left, until a light in the dark appears, and Asuna is there by his side once more. They apologize to one another for their actions, but before they can continue any further, a voice interrupts them. Kayaba himself is there to give them his final words, but he kind of ruins the moment by apparently not even remembering why he made Sword Art Online in the first place. But right now, it doesn't matter. Well, not really. To them, it doesn't. With one final glance, Kayaba leaves the two to spend their final moments together in peace. They share their real names, Kazuto Kitagaya and Asuna Yuki, and say their final goodbyes, exclaiming one last "I love you" before everything turns white. We end the final episode with a hospital ceiling. Kazuto Kitagaya, after 2 long years in a coma, stands with only one thought, one person on his mind: Asuna.